So I wanted to ask you something today, and I'd like you to be honest, mostly to yourself, because obviously I can't hear your answer. When was the last time that you rested and only rested? So that means you didn't have your phone, you were not scrolling on your phone, you didn't have any mental list of things that you should be doing instead. That means you didn't get up after 15, 20 minutes just because you remembered that you had the laundry. When was the last time that you just sat down or you laid down and just stopped everything? That's what I thought. And that's why I wanted to talk about a woman that I know really, really well. Two women, actually. As always, two different archetypes that live in the same body. And these two don't agree on anything. You're listening to The Bold Beginner, the space for high-achieving women who hit the wall after years on autopilot. We talk about body reconnection through physiology and the nervous system because you cannot think your way back into your body. If you enjoy this podcast, consider subscribing or leaving a review or a comment. It genuinely supports the growth of this space. I recently created a Threads account, and I have to say that I really, really love this platform. It's much more interesting to me than older social media like Instagram. But I did post something a little while ago, and it was a very simple question. I asked women with anxiety whether they actually rest on their day off. And I was talking about real rest, the one that I described in the introduction. And the comments, it was basically a wall of no, different versions of no. A few examples would be I rest for 10 minutes and then I feel guilty. The guilty factor just came back again and again. Or it could be I make a to-do list for my day off. I clean, I reorganize, I meal prep for the entire week. A few women said, and obviously I'm paraphrasing here, but they basically said that they felt like they're wasting their lives or their time if they're not doing something productive, even on Sundays. And I was reading through all of this, scrolling through it at night on the weekend, which is ironic because there I was not resting while reading about not resting. But basically I was reading and thinking, okay, it feels like this is not just anxiety, something else going on here. Because you have all these women who know that they need to rest. Intellectually, they get it. Most of them, they knew about burnout. They knew about cortisol levels and sleep and recovery. So they all have the information and still they can't do it. And from everything I read, it seems like the reason why they can't do it is not because they don't want to. It's because there's a second voice here, a little voice. And that's this other version of them that kicks in the moment they try to stop. And that version has a lot of opinions. And obviously it sounded very familiar because I've been her. I've been that person. I've been the woman who sits down and on the couch on a Saturday afternoon with every intention in the world of doing nothing. And within 5 minutes, this restless, slightly panicky feeling, like you should be doing something. You're wasting time. You're falling behind. Behind what? Behind who? I don't know. But the feeling is definitely very specific. And I would argue that it's not even just a thought. It's something very physical. My legs want to move. My hands want to pick something up. And overall, my body literally won't let me be still and stay still. And it's also very weird because from the outside, I look relaxed. And I would bet that all these women look pretty relaxed from the outside. Like you're on the couch, you can have a blanket on, but your nervous system is not following. So your body is almost pretending to rest, like you're trying to perform resting, I guess, or to try and force it to rest, but your nervous system is not following through. And somehow it's still scanning for the next thing that needs handling. What's interesting too is that at the time, when I used to be like that, I used to think that all of this meant I was just a very motivated person. I almost used to wear it like a badge of honor. When I'd say on repeat things like, I just can't sit still, I'm a doer, I need to be productive. And I was saying all that almost like it's some sort of cool personality trait. And I was also fooling myself, by the way. It wasn't me lying to people because I really thought that it was something fundamental about who I was. Unfortunately for me, that's not what it was. And that's not what it is. This thing is a pattern. And it was running me way before I was even old enough to understand. So here's what I think is actually happening. And we're back to the archetypes here. And I keep coming back to them because I do think that inside most of us, and here I'm especially talking to, successful women who've built successful careers, who've achieved a lot of things, they have at least two versions of themselves that are operating at any given time. And usually these two versions are at war. There's the achiever, and the achiever is the one who got you here. She's the one who studied when all of your friends were going out. She's the one who accepted the promotion, who accepted the extra projects to go further, faster. She's the one who made you the competent and reliable person that you are, the impressive person that you are. And this version has been in charge for a very long time, probably years, maybe decades even. And she has rules, very strict and specific rules about what counts as a valuable use of your time and what counts as laziness. And to her, resting, by her definition, is suspicious at best and dangerous at worst. And then there's the other version. And this one, it's kind of hard to find her name. Let's say she's I don't want to call her the rester, but she's the one that wants to stop, wants to have a break. And that doesn't even mean, by the way, that she wants you or the other version to quit your life. But she wants to stop once in a while for an afternoon, a weekend, without having those to-do lists in mind. She's the one, for instance, that come out when you cry in the shower sometimes and you don't really fully know why. She's the one who, when she realizes that there's a clear Saturday, for instance, when there's nothing to do, for about 3 seconds, she feels that bit of relief. She's the one that's there basically every little moment just before the achiever kind of jumps in and says, okay, but what about the groceries? What about that email that I wanted to send? And that thing that you promised to do? I think what's really interesting about that woman, that version of you, she's usually the one that was here before all of this started, before you had a career, before that identity of yours got built around being capable and useful and on top of everything. She's the one who used to read for hours without checking the time, without pressure around it. She used to be the one who did things like maybe lying on the floor, listening to music with nothing to do and nowhere to be. And I want to reassure you that she didn't fully disappear, but she definitely got buried under maybe 20 years of being told that her value was in what she produced. So back to that feeling that you have when you can't rest, the guilt that you feel when you try to rest, I think that it's more like, it feels like guilt, but in fact what it actually is the achiever panicking. Because every time you rest, the achiever loses her purpose. Because that side of you doesn't know who she is anymore when nothing needs to be done. And she doesn't know who you are as a person when nothing needs to be done. That's terrifying for her because she's been the one keeping everything together, or at least that's the story she tells herself. Now, if you want to go one step further, and if you trace it back from a long time ago, the guilt usually has a voice, and it's probably not yours. It can be, I don't know, your parents' voice that used to tell you things like idle hands are the devil's workshop. Or it could be even like a positive, or what seemed to be a positive story, like maybe some teachers who praised you for being responsible, for being reliable, or maybe a manager, a boss of yours who told you that they admired your work ethic. But somewhere, probably most likely when you were very young, you learned that your worth was directly connected to your output, to what you were producing, that you were lovable because you're useful. And so your nervous system takes that, and then it became part of the overall operating system. These types of things, they stay. So now, decades later, when you try to rest, it doesn't seem like a choice anymore. And it feels deep down, even though you may not put words on it, it really feels like a threat to your identity. And even though these questions are not questions you ask yourself consciously, they're definitely here under the surface. If I'm not producing, if I'm not doing anything, then who am I and what am I worth? Kristin Neff is a researcher at the University of Texas, and she talks about this as contingent self-worth. And basically, when your sense of value depends on an outcome, on performance, or on being good enough, then resting becomes threatening. Precisely because rest has no outcome. Rest produces nothing. And so back to what I was saying, if your whole identity is built on producing, then you won't see resting as a break. You'll feel it as some sort of identity crisis. And all of that without you realizing on a Sunday afternoon in your pajamas. And therefore, the achiever does what she always does. She creates urgency. She fills the space. She reminds you of the laundry, the emails, the things your sister or your friend mentioned 2 weeks ago. And in the process, she makes you feel like resting is irresponsible. It's almost like you're getting away with something, almost like any minute someone's going to catch you doing nothing and think less of you. And of course, you listen to her because she's been right before. She has, in fact, kept everything together, and her voice is very familiar. It feels like yours. So I hope that I'm not making this abstract. I'm trying to use like images for you to be able to sit with this for a second, because then you can understand that there's something underneath the guilt that's actually more interesting. And it's this: the reason that you can't rest isn't because you're bad at resting, of course. It's because it requires you to be the other woman, the one that doesn't really have a title, right? A name, the one that wants to stop once in a while. And you haven't been her in such a long time that she feels like a stranger, and it feels like getting outside of your comfort zone. Ironically enough, you have a version of yourself who can be still, who can be unproductive, who can lie maybe on the grass and watch the clouds. That's just a silly example, but I'm sure you can find examples of yourself in your past life doing these sort of things, unproductive things. And you've ignored her for so many years that now, when she tries to come forward, your body literally gets into a stress response and your nervous system reads stillness as a threat. That's just how wired you are. Stephen Porges, the neuroscientist behind the polyvagal theory, talks about this thing called neuroception. Basically, it's your nervous system constantly scanning for safety or danger, and it's under the surface, below your awareness. You don't choose it. And of course, if your system has spent years, decades, learning that value equals output, and stillness equals, I don't know, laziness, vulnerability, then it's going to read an empty afternoon the same way. It's going to be equaling a threat. And your body learned somewhere along the way that doing nothing means being exposed. And exposed, for a lot of us, is dangerous. It's been coded as dangerous a long time ago. And I hope it's getting clearer for you that the guilt is not about the laundry or any task that you have in mind. It was never about that. The guilt is the achiever kind of barging in every time that the other one is trying to exist. And that's because your body doesn't know the difference between real danger and the discomfort of being unproductive. What it knows is that you're not moving, so something must be wrong, so you have to fix it. And I'm pretty sure that some of you may be thinking, okay, yeah, sure, but I'm not that extreme. I can relax. I watch Netflix sometimes. I go to brunch. I meet up with my friends. I do things. I do stuff. I do a lot of stuff. But I really would like you to check something here. When you're watching Netflix, are you also on your phone? And when you're laying in bed, are you scrolling? Are you making lists or replaying some conversations that you had? Because if that's the case, then that's not rest. It's more so distraction. And there's a big difference here, because distraction is more so what the achiever allows you to do when you can't keep full productivity. And it's not the same thing as rest because it doesn't require you to be present. And by the way, this is not new, and that's a great chance for me to quote my favorite philosopher, Blaise Pascal, who wrote about it in the 1600s. He already called it in his Pensées, and he wrote that all of humanity's problem stem from the inability, our inability as humans, to sit quietly in a room alone. And we're talking about the 1600s. There's no phones, no Netflix, no Instagram. And he was already calling it. We've always been running from stillness. We've always been feeling the silence with something, anything. Because sitting with ourselves with nothing to do or nowhere to be is generally one of the hardest things a human being can do. And the fact that a 17th century philosopher could describe your Saturday afternoon this accurately should definitely tell you something. This isn't a modern problem. It's a human one. It's just that unfortunately, we've got much, much better at the distracting part. Obviously, this episode is not meant to bring you an absolute concrete solution, because that's something that would take months and months to slowly implement. But for a start, I think it would be great for you to start noticing when the achiever wakes up, when she just comes up, whenever you decide, when the more quiet version of you wants a break, and when you feel like you want to rest and you want to do nothing. Start noticing when the achiever comes out, and when your body starts feeling a bit tense and like you feel like you need to have something to do, you need to pick up something. And I think that's a first interesting step, because that is already identifying that what in fact is the problem is not that the laundry is not being done, because it's not the end of the world if you give it a bit more hours before you do it. It's not in fact that 1 hour of rest that's going to change the face of the world. So you're going to understand that it's not that the guilt doesn't come from the thing itself, but comes from that version of you that's barging in. And in this moment of realization, try to not leave that state of stillness, even if it's for about 5 minutes. And it will feel like nothing. I want to be honest about that. It will probably feel pointless even. Maybe it will even feel quite uncomfortable. And your body might not actually feel more rested, but probably worse for a minute because it's not used to this. But what you're doing though in those 5 minutes is teaching your nervous system something new. You're showing it that stillness is not an emergency and that doing nothing is not the same as being nothing. And that's also teaching it in a way to have both the achiever and the quieter version of you collaborate together and work together instead of constantly being at war. And I want to share something that one of the women on my Threads posts commented, because I think it was kind of a genius way of putting it. She said, if your brain is wired for productivity, then stop trying to fight it and make rest your next task. Even if you have to put it in your calendar. Tuesday, 7 p.m., I rest. You can give it a time slot even and treat it like a meeting that you can't cancel, like you have to attend. And that's kind of the whole point. That's why I mentioned just before, the idea is not just to kill the achiever. She's part of you and she's been holding things together and she's doing great in many, many, many respects. But you want her to cooperate. You want to speak her language to meet her halfway. And over time, once your nervous system gets used to that block of nothing, it will stop eventually sounding the alarm every time that you just sit down or stay still. And so that time slot that you dedicated to rest will become less and less of a schedule and more of a habit. You know, I think it's funny because we tend to spend so much of our lives trying to become that person who can handle everything. And then one day we do realize that we actually also need to become the person who can handle nothing, who can sit in nothing and just not feel it with something. So maybe try to see it this way next time. Maybe the quieter version of you is the bravest part of you because she's the one who's willing to exist without proof that she deserves to.